The Artist's Toolkit, a training program for the artistic process, problems, background, and exercises.
Hello and welcome back to the Artist's Toolkit, the training program for your personal artistic process. This is the first episode of the second season. Glad to be back. And this is all about one aspect of the artistic process that in the end decides it all, but that in my experience very, very often gets underestimated, overlooked, even though it is probably the most important partner in your work. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about material. Material has its own will, its own personality, and its own characteristics. I very often see this happen, that my students, for example, they spend a lot of time on making a perfect plan. They have all these beautiful sketches, and I have a great idea, and they know all the details in their minds. And then they plan like 1 week in the end to make this plan become reality. And this can happen only when you underestimate material. It happens to everyone. I mean, you see all these building projects that take 5 years instead of 3, and it happens also to myself after 30 years of making art. No problem, it just happens. But the thing is, you think you know it all, and you think, I'll do it this way and that way and then this way, and then everything will be fine. But when you actually start, then the material, this personality, the material that you don't know well enough, the material says, what now? What are you expecting? You don't even know how to address me properly, and now you expect me to do what you want? Blah. Forget about it. So, a large part of your process is always to get to know your material. And even materials that you've known for a long time, you always need to get to know them again when maybe you use them in a slightly different setting and so on. The more materials you know, and the better you know them, the more freedom of movement you have as an artist, obviously. And the better you know the unique peculiarities, the characteristics, and the way your material behaves, the better you know that. The better you know, this material likes to combine with this tool, and it doesn't like this other tool, and if I do this, it reacts in a certain way, and it can bend it or can't bend it. It reacts to different temperatures, and yes, and how, if I want to combine it with another material, I need to keep certain facts in mind. For example, if you try to glue metal, the chance is that in the majority of cases this won't work. Or another frequent mistake is the idea that wax can be dissolved in water. No, it can't. Wax is fatty and wax is hydrophobic. You cannot dissolve wax in water. You can mix it with oil, but not with water. I mean, that means if you want to dye wax, if you want to give it a certain color, then you need to do this with a color that is based on oil and not with watercolor. And such small details very often decide whether your project comes out great or fails. So, you need to get to know your materials. You need to look at your material, touch it, feel it, taste it. If it's not toxic, drag it around, try it in all temperatures, in all seasons, and just test them out. You need to make tests. You need to build models. You need to try out how the material behaves, especially when you're working for outside. Then this is always one of the big challenges and a major discipline, working outside. And a problem when you work for outside is, one, everything that you build inside is only half the size once you take it out the door. A 30 by 20 inch sheet of paper outside looks only half the size. So, rule number 1 for working for outside, everything needs to be bigger. But of course, you also need to remember that when you work for outside, these things, whatever you do, will be subject to bad weather, rain, snow, temperature changes, and so on. And you need to know that your material can take it. How do you test it? Well, one step, of course, as always, is watch. Watch it. Observe what things are made from. When you're sitting outside a cafe, when you're sitting in the park, when you're walking in the street, just have a look. Okay, here they have installed a kind of sun sail. How is the construction? How did they attach it? Okay, here they have a kind of banisters. How did they connect the pieces? Is this very weathered or isn't it? How did they seal it? And so on. Or when you work with mechanical pieces, mechanical methods, for example, look at all electronic devices that you have in your household. Can you change them? Can you transform them? What of those might you want to use in a project? Can you transform your mixer into a painting machine? Can you transform your blender into something that distributes things in space? Can you turn your ventilator into a belly stroking machine? Or maybe, can you transform an old-fashioned light bulb into a heating device? And the more you observe and the more you put, hopefully, I hope you do it, the more you put into your sketchbook, the more you have at your fingertips when you need it.
The Artist's Toolkit.
When dealing with material, there are a few basic categories and rules that will help you to classify and to understand your material. One I already mentioned when I talked about wax. When you use a material, a color, or a building or modeling material, no matter what, the first thing you should know, is this water-based or does it reject water? So, is it oil-based or does it have any other kind of base? This is the first thing you should know. And when you know that, you already know a lot, because everything that can be solved in water is very easy to handle. It doesn't take well to weather. Obviously, rain is water. It's normally easy to wash out of your clothes, off your hands, off your environment. And you can use it on everything else that likes water, that accepts water, like paper, wood. So that's category number one. Category number two. Your material doesn't like water. You cannot be solved in water. Okay, what else will solve it? For example, in many cases, nearly everything can be solved in petrol. Though normally petrol is mainly for cleaning stuff. But the question is always, okay, acrylics, water-based. Oil colors, oil-based. Varnish, they're normally resin-based. And you should just need what you need to make them thinner or thicker, or when they start burning, whatever. These are the things you should know. The thing is that you develop a feeling for this. For example, when you look around, you're in a room, and then just to know this in some corner of your mind, just to know, okay, if I were to splash around a bucket of watercolor, the color would, the paint, the color would stick to the wallpaper. It wouldn't stick to the windowsill, which is made of artificial stone. It wouldn't stick to the window glass. It would not stick to the window frames, depending on what they're painted with, but they're probably plastic or metal or varnished. But it might stick to the floorboards in those places where the varnish has been worn off, and it would not stick to the floorboards where the varnish is still on. Just as a feeling for your environment, to be aware of what your environment is made of, and that it is all materials, that it's like a many-voiced choir of different things, different persons, different characters that have different behavior and react differently to what you do.
The Artist's Toolkit.
The third thing with material is always, how do I connect? How do I join different materials? That's a huge field. It's an entire science, an entire profession on its own. How to join materials. As I already said, for example, trying to glue metal is going to go wrong in 95% of the case. It's not a great idea. Trying to glue wood, under pressure especially, works. But of course, it's better if you know how to join wood with a, entirely wooden joint. Yeah, as I said, it's an entire science on its own. Plastics, all different kinds of plastics can very often only be fused or with heat or glued and so on. These are gigantic fields of knowledge about the world works, about physics, chemistry, and also just of daily experience. All I can say about it, be aware, collect, learn, look around you. And when you pick a material you want to work with, then the first thing you should know about it is, how can I join this material with itself or with other materials? And that's key to success, of course, to know the right technique, the right way of joining. And of course, aim number 1 should be to get away from the terrible hot melt gun and its empty promises of joining everything that doesn't write out, scream and run. Because that's just pretension, because sometimes things may stick, but sometimes they will only for a minute or for a few days, and then everything will fall apart again. I know a hot melt gun is a great tool. I don't want to take it away from you. I just want to encourage everyone that, if there is a different solution, a better one, use it.
The Artist's Toolkit.
So, to sum it up, material. Point 1, know your material. Point 2, have a feeling, develop a sensitivity whether your material takes to water or doesn't. Because that will tell you about 100 other abilities and features of your material. Point number 3, if you decide on a material, please learn about it. Find out about it as much as you can. How does this material connect to other materials, or how to join it with itself? What are the right joining techniques for your material? If it's a kind of paint, what's the right medium to solve a paint? Which surfaces does it work on? And so on, and so on, and so on. And if you work in 3D, always check which kind of joining is necessary here. Soldering, gluing, like tooth joining, nails, bolts, let it grow together, whatever. Knowing that is definitely one of the basic keys to success when you have to deal with material. Of course, you may be a concept artist or you do performances and you do not have to deal with material at all. Okay, that's fine then. But as soon as you run into a material, as soon as you want to include objects or want to make something for your performance, there you go. You're back to square one. Point 4 is, who is your material? Who do you have there? Who are you trying to talk to? Is the material brittle? Will it splinter? Is it a material that is easy and fast to work with? Is it a material that has its own temperament? Is it a material that reacts quickly to your impulses and reacts to you and responds? Is it a material that is easy to work with? Like, for example, classics like clay. Clay is a great material because it responds, it answers to you at once. You just poke it with a finger and it goes back and tries to avoid your finger, kind of. You pull it and the clay follows. So clay is super communicative, super responsive. And so it's easy to talk to. It has other disadvantages. For example, if you want to make this last, what you've made in clay, then it becomes more complicated because you need to burn it, you need a furnace, you need kiln, you need a certain thickness, it can't be too massive, and so on and so on. But using it, for example, for a 3D sketch, that's what it's been used for during centuries, for plastic sketches. The material number 1, clay, is great. Or similar, wax, great, valuable, natural material. That is slightly more complicated than clay because it needs a certain temperature to make it flexible. And then the next step is, for example, plasticine, which is also great, but often much harder to shape. You need more muscle in your hand. It's harder. And at the end of the scale, There are materials that are really hard to work with, like metal. You can press metal 100 times, it doesn't care. And in order to work with metal, at the worst case, you will need a forge, and for lighter cases, you may need a mill, and you need special saws, and you need welding equipment, etc., etc., etc. All that can be organized, but you need to know that you are going to need this. Metal is a material that resists. Metal is a material that needs to be painstakingly convinced to take on a different shape, or to take on any shape at all that you would like to have it. Why do I keep going on about this? I talk about this because, first, number one, the more you know about the behavior and the character of your material, the better you can work with it, and you can go with its behavior. Wood, for example, has a direction because it grows from the ground to the sky. Wood is a grown material that reacts differently depending on which direction you are trying to cut it. With or against the fiber. Wood can also be ground and you can smooth it, but it's also splintery and you can use it. And if there are lots of wooden sculptures, contemporary sculptures, when you look at those, there is no sandpapering, polishing, or so, and they're still great. They're splintery and lovely. They look rough, and it's so much about the material itself, what it's like, how it reacts. And you look at it and you think, wood. And, you should use it because you decide to use it. If I want something that is smooth and heavy, then you can use a good wood, a slow-growing wood, or you can use stone or metal or whatever. And metal is hard to shape. Maybe a slow-growing wood is better, but it's also hard to shape. And if you want something that is super smooth and heavy, maybe ceramics aren't bad either, or glass. It depends on what you want. And you should be able to decide and make a conscious choice. In order to do that, you need to know what's there. But what I really wanted to say is, why is it so important to know stuff about material? Why is it important to know that this is a responsive, flexible, soft material that will easily respond to what you want? And this is more resisting a material that is slow and that is hard to work with.
The Artist's Toolkit.
Well, first of all, it's important for your planning, for your timetable. If you have to do something quickly and you have only very little time, it doesn't make much sense to use a material like granite or whatever, to use a material that wants time. And it is also important in relation to who you are, because material has a character and so do you. You also have a character, and you need to combine the two somehow. If you are a choleric person and tend to get angry easily and you're really impatient, it might be a good exercise to work with a slow material. But only at a moment when you have no pressure, right? Work with material that makes you slow down, to connect, to learn patience, and to work slowly and diligently. But only in situations when it fits, right? At a moment when you're impatient anyway and you need to get something done quickly and you're about to lose your nerve anyway and to freak out. Working with a very hard wood and to overcome its resistance and to negotiate with it may not be such a good idea. It can make you grow, you can learn from it, or you can avoid it. The important thing is you should decide, knowing what you're getting into. There are a lot of people who love fast materials that react right away. And there are people who love materials they can't control, who love open experimental arrangements. I make a setup and I start here and they do something and then the material does something else and we don't know what is going to happen in the end. For example, I love working with bread dough. And you can model it and you can shape it. But in the end, basically because it is alive, there are microorganisms in it. In the end, it will do something on its own. And it's always a kind of cooperation. It's always a surprise what's going to happen in the end. There are materials that will resist you. And a lot of people like that. This kind of intense communication, this slow progress, this negotiation you have to enter into with the material that you slowly and steadily learn about, and that you slowly and steadily convince to take on a different shape.
Exercise.
Please think about this and look back. Look back at your own experiences with material. What kind of material do you like? What kind of material have you worked with? What were your experiences with it? Did you like slow, resisting materials that you had to convince slowly? Or did you prefer the fast materials, that responds right away and answers at once? Do you like experimental materials that will always do their own stuff and add their own stuff, their own aspect to your work? Do you like to work with living materials? Do you like to work with materials that grow? So please make a list. Make a list of materials that you especially like and note down why you like them. Like, I like to work with wax because it answers quickly to my impulses. I like that it becomes brittle very quickly and hardens, and that it takes on strange shapes that you cannot control. Or I like to work with wood because it is a grown living material that is always new and always different, and that you have to learn anew with every new piece. Or I like to work with plants because you have to plan, you have to be aware of them as living beings, and then something new is going to happen and it is alive and every day is different. So please make a list of materials you like to work with and their characteristics and what about them you like. And please make a second list with materials that you haven't tried out yet, but that you would like to work with. So 2 lists, materials from the past and materials that should be in your future. Exercise number 2. Please find 5 ideas, find 5 devices in your environment, your household or in the street or in your daily life, 5 objects that you want to rededicate or rebuild. Come up with 5 electronic devices, instruments, tools from your household or from out there somewhere, and come up with different uses for them. I've already mentioned a few examples. For example, transform your electric drill into a painting machine. Find different uses for whatever. Your oven, your salad spinner, for those of us who own such a thing. It can also be something that doesn't belong to you. Come up for a different idea for the blue flashlight on top of the police car outside, or for the ticket stamping machine on the streetcar, whatever. Pick something that appears in your daily life and rededicate it or reshape it or find a different, more exciting artistic use for it. 5 examples, 5 sketches, 5 ideas. Enjoy. And of course, as usual, I have some reading recommendations, though I have to admit it was quite hard to come up with stuff that is actually about material, not just one, but material kind of in general. So I have one book recommendation that is Richard Sennett, S-E-N-N-E-T-T, The Craftsman, New Haven, New York, 2008. And I can only recommend Chapter 1, The Troubled Craftsman, Fractured Skills, Head and Hand Divided.
The Artist's Toolkit. Conceptualized and presented by Käthe Wenzel. Assistance, Nadja Driller. A project by Europa-Universität Flensburg.